Nam myo renge kyo nam myo renge kyo nam myo renge kyo. Here we go. Hi everyone. Today I'm going to start on a long go show. This one's titled On Establishing the Correct Teaching for the Peace of the Land. Peace being quietude, peace. I need I need to talk about this for a moment, and maybe I'll read some of the background first, which I don't really want to do consistently, but it might be important in these larger gosho. There's a reason why I've spent a lot of time talking about the Lotus Sutra, the perfection of wisdom, the Vimalakirti, the Lankavatara, the many other Mahayana sutras, as well as earlier teachings, and I've made a point of trying to help you in your endeavors, in your independent studies, to understand the hyperbole used thousands of years ago. Even today we do this. We use hyperbole to create, we can call them stories or fables or examples or analogies, all this kind of language you can put around it. But basically, explaining deep concepts is difficult with words. Our words, as sophisticated as our language has become in our evolution as human beings, we still are not able to convey a precise, granular experience to one another. It's just one of the fallacies of communication and language, because life is about how we experience it, not how we talk about it. Not about the physical realm, right? So, I've repeated this over and over again as I've talked about these other sutras. Now, Nichiren is a different teacher altogether, a different type of teaching altogether. And a lot of that is because of his particular condition. In other words, his advent was in a particularly different world situation. Japan was in the midst of, had already begun, but still was in the throes of changing from an imperial-based governance of extreme opulence and serfdom to the very militaristic and I suppose a sort of a middle class, the shogunate, the samurai class, the warrior class that used to be the tool of the imperial to govern the serf and protect the kingdoms, the land, and so forth, was now running the whole show. So they were closer to the serfs in their life experience, but they also aspired to this amazing opulence, spiritual opulence, if you will, of what it is to be, not an emperor so much as, well, maybe you can figure it out from there. Do some study on that. The only reason I bring it up is because in Nichiren's day, not only was he a scholar, a dedicated scholar of spiritual matters, but because of the nature of Buddhism is about, yes, it's about deep self-knowledge, but it's deep self-knowledge, as you find out as you study more and more, especially toward the ultimate aim of Buddhism, is that self-knowledge is a tool for connecting, that self is not just an independent, this body, this thing, it's all of life. And so it's an all-encompassing self-knowledge. It includes others, other people, other things, all phenomena. And without intercommunicating with those other phenomena, we are doomed to an insignificant self. So, by the nature of Buddhist practice, the social order is extremely important. And the social order in Japan, as I've just described, was in a lot of flux. And part of that is not only from a standpoint of being subjected to the flux, there's certain uncertainty, right? But there's also a lot of vying for position, vying for power, vying for favor, vying for, hey, you're the great protector and you own all of this and that's great. But with me, you could really be great. And there's that aspiring to emperordom, right, of the warrior. And yet the samurai code is not an egotistical code at its core, right? It's one more of servitude. So there's a bit of a psychological shift, breakdown, trauma thing going on in the culture too. So I say all of this, and maybe I won't read the background now that I've done all that, because there's a fascinating thing that happens and you'll see it as I read this Gosho. But in reading Nichiren, my original point, you have to take into context how thoroughly he had to show the superiority of the teachings of the Lotus, the order of the teachings, the goal of the teachings, and just completely destroy these bogus arguments that these other competing forces for the hearts and souls of Japan were polluting Buddhism. They were polluting the very nature of what Buddhism was about, claiming that they alone contained the answers and the complete force of Buddhism. And it was more a cult of personality than it was a cult of Buddhism. And so Nichiren was constantly railing against this stuff. And they had huge debates, government-sponsored debates. The samurais would watch these guys debate so that they could select, they're warriors. Spiritual matters were important to them, but they weren't about to go through the scholarship of thousands of years of scholars to determine who was right, who they should put on their court and say, okay, you're the badass. You're the one who knows it. You're the one who can advise me correctly, so I don't have to think about it. So these were critical decisions they were making, and so obviously the competition for those ears and those minds and those hearts, it was pretty horrible. One of the large cults of Buddhism that was extant at the time that Nichiren came about was this very reduced form of, there were several cults that all basically fell under the idea of what was called at the time Nembutsu. Nembutsu was a naming of a Buddha. And there was this idea, and this is it's not unlike Western religions, where there's an adherence, and this human being seems to have this fascination. Some people call them death cults. I'm not sure if I'm ready to, but I've thought about that myself. Everything's about what happens after you die. It's like everybody forgets that you have to live this life. And even in Buddhism, hundreds of years, and there's still cults today of Buddhism that have this just obsession with the death of this human body and where do we go afterward? It's so not Buddhist. It's so not Buddhism. And yet there it is. And it was driving Nichiren out of his mind. Man, you guys, it's here. Enlightenment is right here and now. This is what's been taught thousands of years. What are you doing chanting the name of this fictitious creature that somehow is the gatekeeper and will allow you into this pure land? The pure land is a state of mind. It's something you experience right now. Right now. The only reason your land is not pure is because your monkey mind is in the way. If you can move it aside, you will see that you are in the pure land of tranquil light. This is enlightenment. Wow, that's just too hard. And back in the 13th century, people were still mystified by life. People today are still mystified by life. It is an amazing thing. You know, talk to particle physicists. Einstein's passed away, but this is what they talk about. There's no need for mysticism and gods and all the deities and all these special weird forces, mystical forces, when you just look at the sheer amazing nature of the observable universe. It blows your mind. You can't conceive of it. So there's no need. And Nichiren, this is what he was struggling with. So this is what, on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of mind, or the peace of the land, or peace in the land, however you want to say that. And he adopts in this one a question-answer sort of format, but he does it in a conversational style. So here we go. Let's just dive in. The other curious thing I will mention as I dive in is you will probably notice tremendous similarities in what he was struggling with what's going on in our world today. With this incredible rise of fascism and authoritarianism and how that's destroying the hearts of the people and the nation. So, here we go. Once there was a traveler who spoke these words in sorrow to his host. The host obviously being Nichiren. In recent years, there have been unusual disturbances in the heavens, strange occurrences on earth, famine and pestilence, historically so, all affecting every corner of the empire, still calling it an empire, spreading throughout the land. Oxen and horses lie dead in the streets, and the bones of the stricken crowd the highways. Over half the population has already been carried off by death, and there is hardly a single person who does not grieve. Think back to the plagues. How shaken would your psychology be if half your town was piled up dead in the streets? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? All the while, some put their whole mind of determination in the sharp sword of the Buddha Amida. There it is. Amitabha, you might hear it. A created personage not based on the actual person or on an actual person, but represent that gatekeeper of a pure land. You'll hear Amitabha used in a lot of martial arts movies. And intone the name of this Lord of the Western land. Others believe that hearing the name of the Buddha medicine master will heal all ills. And recite that sutra that describes this thus come one of the eastern region. Some putting their trust in the passage in the Lotus Sutra that says, his illness will be wiped out and he will know neither old age nor death. Pay homage to the wonderful words of that sutra. Others relying upon the sutra passage that reads, "The 7 disasters will instantly vanish, and the 7 blessings will instantly appear." Conduct ceremonies at which 100 priests expound the sutra at 100 preaching platforms. There are those who follow the esoteric teachings of the True Word School and conduct rituals in which they fill 5 jars with water, and others who devote themselves entirely to seated meditation and try to perceive the emptiness of all phenomena as clearly as the moon, a reference to Chan or Zen sects at the time. Some write out the names of the 7 guardian spirits and paste them on 1,000 gates. Others paint pictures of the 5 mighty bodhisattvas and hang them over 10,000 thresholds, and still others pray to the heavenly gods and earthly deities in ceremonies conducted at the 4 corners of the capital and on the 4 boundaries of the nation. Taking pity on the plight of the common people, the rulers carry out government on the national and local levels in a benevolent manner. So basically, Nichiren's basically outlined out all these other cults of Buddhism that exist in his day. And the Nembutsu, the Zen, are big proponents at the time that he's going to straighten out. This is all from the annotated and revised version of the Gosho that I've created. And I'm finally, after 20 years, but in the last 3 years, I've been in print working on clearing up the language and making sure the actual intent of what Nichiren was teaching is preserved rather than westernized and diluted. So these are available on my lulu.com/Kwoon site, KWOON. And I have 10% discount on them right now. Anyway, I will continue. Make sure you look for the ones with the red cover, not the older versions. I don't know how those got online. They should never got online. But despite all these efforts, they merely exhaust themselves in vain. Famine and epidemics rage more fiercely than ever. Beggars are everywhere in sight, and scenes of death fill our eyes. Corpses pile up in mounds like observation platforms, and dead bodies lie side by side like planks on a bridge. If we look about, we find that the sun and moon continue to move in their accustomed orbits, and the 5 planets, there's a lot of footnotes on this, I'll let you read them, follow their proper course. The 3 treasures of Buddhism continue to exist, and the period of 100 reigns has not yet expired. Then, why is it that the world has already fallen into decline, and that the laws of the state have come to an end? What is wrong? What error has been committed? So, the host then spoke. I have been brooding alone on this matter, indignant in my heart, but now that you have come, we can lament together. Let us discuss the question at length. And here we go. When a man leaves family life and enters the Buddhist way, it is because he hopes to attain Buddhahood through the teachings of the Buddha. But attempts now to move the gods, the forces of nature, fail to have any effect, and appeals to the power of the Buddhas produce no results. When I observe carefully the state of the world today, I see people who give way to doubt because of the lack of understanding on the part of eminent priests. They look up at the heavens and mouth their resentment, or gaze down at the earth and sink deep into despair. I have pondered the matter carefully with what limited resources I possess, and have looked a little at the scriptures for an answer. The teachings. That's corrected in the latest version, by the way. The people of today all turn their backs upon what is right. To a person, they give their allegiance to evil, negative thoughts and tendencies, in other words. Sorry, I have trouble turning pages sometimes. This is the reason that the benevolent deities have abandoned the nation and departed together, that sages leave and do not return, and in their stead devils and demons come, and disasters and calamities occur. I cannot keep silent on this matter. I cannot suppress my fears. The guest, hearing this, said, "These disasters that befall the empire, these calamities of the nation, I am not the only one pained by them. The whole populace is weighed down with sorrow. Now, I have been privileged to enter the orchid room and listen to these enlightened words of yours. You speak of the gods and sages taking leave, and of disasters and calamities arising in sequence. Upon what sutras do you base your views? Could you describe for me the passages of proof?" The host said, "There are numerous passages that could be cited and a wide variety of proofs. For example, in the Golden Light Sutra we read, quote, 'The four heavenly kings said to the Buddha, though this sutra exists in the nation, its ruler has never allowed it to be propagated. In his heart he turns away from it, and he takes no pleasure in hearing its teachings. He neither makes offerings to it, honors it, nor praises it, nor is he willing to honor or make offerings to the four kinds of Buddhists,'" laymen, laywomen, men priests, and women priests, "who embrace the sutra. In the end, he makes it impossible for us and the other countless heavenly beings who are our followers to hear this profound and wonderful teaching. He deprives us of the sweet dew of its words and cuts us off from the flow of the correct teaching, so that our majesty and strength are drained away. Thus the number of beings who occupy the evil paths increases, and the number who dwell in the human and heavenly realms decreases. People fall into the river of the sufferings of birth and death and turn their backs on the road to nirvana. World-honored one, we, the four heavenly kings, as well as our various followers and the yakshas and other beings, observing this state of affairs, have decided to abandon this nation, for we have no heart to protect it. And it is not we alone who cast aside this ruler. All the great benevolent deities who guard and watch over the countless different regions of the country will also invariably reject him. And once we and the others abandon and desert this nation, then many different types of disasters will occur in the country, and the ruler will fall from power. Not a single person in the entire population will possess a heart of goodness. There will be nothing but binding and enslaving, killing and injuring, anger and contention. People will slander each other or fawn upon one another, and the laws will be twisted until even the innocent are made to suffer." This is where I start thinking about our current situation in the world. "Pestilence will become rampant, comets will appear again and again, two suns will come forth side by side, and eclipses will occur with an unaccustomed frequency. Black arcs and white arcs will span the sky as harbingers of ill fortune. Stars will fall, the earth will shake, and noises will issue from the wells. Torrential rains and violent winds will come out of season. Famine will constantly occur, and grains and fruits will not ripen. Marauders from many other regions will invade and plunder the nation. The people will suffer all manner of pain and affliction, and no place will exist where one may live in safety." Yikes. I'm going to take a break here. I'm wanting to keep my videos shorter. Let me know how you feel about that. But I think that's a good start. I think you can see how important it is to read Nichiren, given that his advent was at the beginning of our current age of decline, of Mappo, of the disappearing of the teachings. So he was a very, very important signpost to remind us why we're Buddhists, what we're doing, and to not be dissuaded by these others, what to call them, that detract us. This is why you've heard me often rail against these organized groups, whatever you want to call them, that prohibit you. You know, your ears, your little red flag should go up the moment you hear somebody tell you, just read our books, just read what we say, don't read what they say, don't read those other books, don't read the other sutras, you don't need them, it's all here. You know, I'm not saying everybody who does that is evil. I'm just saying that they're ignorant, because that's not Buddha's teachings. From the get-go, we're supposed to study broadly, not only all of Buddhist teachings and writings, scholarship, but all scholarship. Because ultimately, it's all leading to the same knowledge. If you only learn how to cook or bake apple pie, how can you be trusted to make a good stew? Maybe you're natural, but there are things about cooking stew that are uniquely different than baking a cake, right? Or a pie. It's the same with Buddhism. There is an ultimate teaching, but the ultimate teaching rests on the shoulders of all the teaching before it. That becomes obvious when you study broadly. So we don't even have to state it as long as you study broadly. It's like that with anything, right? Humans, we tend to be like this about life. And that's our whole problem. Buddhism is about the... right? There are those who say, I'm far too animated to be teaching Buddhism. Well, guess what? We live in an age of unbelievable amounts of information streaming at us constantly. And we just find ways to make it even more so. So yeah, I'm animated. That must be what we need at this time. I don't fight it. Because in my heart, I know what I'm doing. Okay. So, Nichiren Gosho. We'll continue with this one, part 2. Thank you for being here. I hope you're having a wonderful life. I support you. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. And